Today's presentation is about Albuquerque's Central Corridor, our main street, and the planning, analysis, and engagement work of the last 2 years to maximize benefits for residents and businesses. As we begin to shift from planning to implementation, I'd like to share some background on this place, the 12,000-acre corridor, everything along Central and within a 10-minute walk north and south of it, by looking at some of the founding principles that have traditionally made our places here. Then I'd like to focus on 3 things. First, the what. What we think the work to be done looks like and what would it lead to. This includes transit strategies and development strategies and what each can produce. Second, the where, both place-based approaches and corridor-wide approaches. And third, the how. How do we implement? Placemaking is critical to the long-term success of the city. We need to shape the right spaces to reach their full potential value. A plan resulted from this work, and it sets the stage for successful implementation. It goes into details about the physical changes needed to make placemaking work, as well as the policies, practices, and public investments. So the Central Corridor work is centered on place and founded on what you might call Burke principles that built the places for people. Similarly, whether in Old Town, New Town, or the Native American settlements that preceded both. They focused around a common space, a market, a plaza, a place of worship, with businesses and government buildings around it as cross destinations, residences clustered close by, and farms and other production beyond, and bringing their goods to the centers. And the centers are built for people, made to spend time in and return to, connected to other centers by the current modes of transportation, and buildings are organized in blocks shaped by the public streets. A central gathering place made densities logical, efficient, and natural to build up rather than out, so more people could be closer to these benefits. So let's look at how these principles are as applicable today as they were when they were originally employed, by looking at a current example in our landscape. At Old Town. Its single-purpose use provides only one kind of value, parking revenue and convenience to the driver. But there's an opportunity to apply the founding principles of placemaking and generate much more value. So the planning work that we've undertaken recommended that instead we use that land to connect our most trafficked street, Central Avenue, to our most visited tourist attraction, Old Town Plaza. Make the plaza more visible from Central and draw people in by extending more of what's great, the buildings, to Central and the new transit stop right there, rather than greet them with a 120-foot of surface parking lot that we dare them to walk through to get to the beautiful part that they came to experience. And by connecting these origins and destinations with sufficient streets and wide sidewalks, we use the public streets to frame private blocks, literally to make places, and transform the pathways between and into something of interest for visitors and profitable for more shop owners. And by reapplying the principles that built Old Town, parking serves people, it doesn't replace them. So put some on the street in front of the retail and the rest behind buildings are screened. In these ways, the value per acre of the 1.7 acres of asphalt today grows to become similar to the rest of Old Town, which has been producing some of the highest city value per acre, literally, for centuries. The planning grant from the FTA was for Transit-Oriented Development, or TOD, which centers on places for people. The wheel from the Project for Public Spaces shows the qualities of a place that people experience in the center here. Its comfort and image, its access and connection, its sociability, and the use in activities. Across the nation, as well as in Albuquerque, there's a strong and consistent demand for mixed-use, walkable, transit-served urban places, or walk-ups, as they're called by former Burqueño Chris Lineberger, who used to live in Albuquerque and is now a researcher at George Washington University in D.C., and a national leader on documenting such trends along with ULI, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and others. The benefits of these walkable urban places bring people are detailed in the wheel's middle circle, things like fun, active, safe, proximity, and measured by things in the outer circle, things like retail sales, property values, health, street life, and the number of children, elderly, and women using the spaces, etc. In a TOD orientation, we use and create strong places with two things: strategies to reduce the cost of living and poverty through transportation, and development strategies to increase reinvestment and jobs. Let's look at some of the transit-driven strategies. Things like strengthening and make places for people within walking distance of transit. Reduce the cost of households through efficiencies, location efficiencies, and resource efficiencies. And connection strategies to opportunity. There are currently 270,000 jobs that will be accessible within a 30-minute commute when the transit improvement is finished. That sets us up to finish the work of last-mile connections to and from people's homes and destinations to the nearest transit station, and connections between multiple modes of transportation, between transit, walking, biking, rail, car share, etc. Now, some of the development strategies. Things like making it easier to invest and develop here than anywhere else in the region. The data show that investments have the highest potential ROI for the city in our central corridor. So we need to do everything we can to make the best thing the easiest thing so we get more of them. Strategies like creating destinations. This is well illustrated by the story of the owner of the Grove, who, when she learned that Ito was getting a new transit station, said, "We need to be making people want to come here. So that means making it more clean, safe, inviting, branded in local identity, and fill in the missing teeth on the vacant lots, as well as better street lighting and furniture and other pedestrian amenities." These are the kinds of physical placemaking tactics that help people better enjoy a place and want to return to it. We also need strategies that serve the whole corridor, such as financing, policy changes that apply to many places, and we'll talk more about some of these. What's bolstering this work is two once-in-a-generation actions. First, the revamp of our 40-year-old zoning code, which was often car-oriented and frequently in conflict with making places for people. For example, and this is no joke, the on-street parking requirements for many developments was calibrated exactly to the number of toilets in the building. We worked with about 100 stakeholders to evaluate and change some of that in the IDO. But it's an example of the kind of changes that we need to make to our regulations. The second once-in-a-generation action is a major transit system improvement. Much of the heavy lifting has already been done on these, but for each, you can't just build it and they will come. There's still work to do to make both as effective as they need to be. And the work has identified recommended action steps for both. The work that developed those recommendations and many others was done by local and national experts who compiled analyses and proven techniques. And one of the key insights from the Center for Neighborhood Technology, is illustrated on the top left, is how we can leverage the value of location efficiency. The concept is so predictable in value that the lending industry has created a unique loan product called a location-efficient mortgage that factors in presumed savings from living near transit, so the customer gets a lower rate or a bigger loan because they're spending measurably less on transportation. Another valuable insight was Joe Minicozzi's work, the spike diagram below the blue and yellow, that was similar to his findings in 40 other American cities, that our tax base is coming disproportionately from our core neighborhoods in downtown. So we can use this as a strategy to create more value from our already most productive places. The best practices and what worked elsewhere were vetted with over 1,000 residents in a series of community meetings over the last 2 years. 4 department heads heard from a sampling of these folks from different parts of the corridor last month and how they want to be continuing part of this work and how they support aggressive city implementation. The result is all of this work is a TOD chapter of over 200 pages that can be added to the existing Route 66 action plan, a Rank 2 facilities plan that the planning department is now working on getting adopted by council. This is a word map of the values revealed by the 2 years of community discussion. Then the poles in red in the quadrants reveal some of the tensions and opportunities between things like development and history, between justice and development. And this shows that our values are a core asset. And as we move from draft to adoption, we've got the opportunity to signal Mayor Keller's commitment to a different kind of community engagement by taking a page from Pittsburgh's TOD planning grant. They too started with the technical benefits of TOD and they got decent engagement. But when they shifted and asked people in the corridor neighborhoods what their priorities were, they then framed the TOD recommendations in ways that supported those locally defined priorities, and engagement skyrocketed. The issues raised had about 80% overlap with TOD, but framing them as delivering on community priorities made all the difference. Now the city is organizing itself to deliver on them. So each of our major cultures in Albuquerque history founded their built environments in this place in similar ways. They created places for people, communal centers surrounded by private spaces, walkable, efficient, high-density urban places. Whether that be the Pueblos, every Hispano Plaza in New Mexico, or Newtown with its downtown street grid centered around a railroad station. Historic approaches are consistent with and reinforcing of Mayor Keller's administration's priorities. The economic development strategies, either number 6 or number 1, according to him, is placemaking. This is central to the work. And his criteria for economic development incentive awards are completely consistent, especially the place-based strategies and the ROI concept. And this work is embedded in the ED department's strategic plan, internally referred to as the roll-up document. So what does this look like and what does it lead to? For transportation strategies, this will lead to a cost of living reduction and the reduction of poverty. About poverty. Despite the last 5 years of regional economic growth of $4 billion, poverty increased by 3%, or 19,000 people. That's almost 1 in 5 residents. So how can transportation strategies impact poverty? If you plan for cars and traffic, you get cars and traffic. If you plan for places and people, you get places for people. So what does it look like? Let's look at downtown and its walkability study conducted when the community brought in Jeff Speck a few years ago, a national expert on walkability. We're looking at from about 7th to Broadway along Central Avenue. And identified in red are the top generators and receivers of people, and in green the most common paths between them. Planning for people and places would involve maximizing the red by concentrating more density in those red areas, vacant upper floors, reduce vacancy on the first floors, and reposition obsolete buildings for reuse. Several cities had downtown residential goals, and we too have had one in the past, that we've met. Typical, something like 1,000 new residential units in 10 years. We need such a goal today concentrated in places that will matter most. It can't be spread like peanut butter too thin or we won't notice the experience of increased people on the street. We also need to fill in the missing teeth. Surface parking lots need to be replaced by buildings with people. And in the green, we need to deploy physical placemaking tactics, or complete streets tactics as they're called, that we've been deploying in other parts of Albuquerque. The idea is to make pathways inviting, safe, and appealing to those in a variety of transportation modes, whether they're walking, biking, taking transit, or driving. And the blue stars represent transit stations that bring even more people from beyond downtown to circulate among the red and the green. What do transit and efficiency strategies look like at the household level? Here are the typical expenditures for a household making $20,000 to $30,000 a year. We can target these, H plus T. That's when we consider housing costs, or H, alone, Albuquerque is pretty average, sometimes low. But when we add the transportation costs, affordability shrinks, and it almost vanishes at 80% AMI level. With the exception of near transit, those locations remain low cost. But when government measures housing affordability, it only considers the H cost. Transportation is an American household's second largest expense, and when you consider both H plus T, it gives you a much more accurate measure of housing affordability. And it's the costs associated with T, or transportation, that we can likely impact the most. So T strategies become poverty reduction strategies. Using AAA estimates, we can reduce T costs from $1,200 a year to almost $12,000 a year in a household that has accessible to transit, with changes as modest as monthly or annual transit passes, all the way to being able to get rid of a car per one working age adult in a household. No one in America has done this in this way to address housing affordability and poverty. We can. I'm going to add an E to the H plus T for energy. So beyond location efficiency, resource efficiency can also drive down costs of living for Albuquerque households. The utility industry is undergoing radical change, first in places like California, where the state government has initiated low-income benefit mandates in the agricultural Central Valley. And they're being met by unlikely actors, companies like Tesla and Google, which are growing beyond their founding industries to become utility players. They're entering the utility market by installing wall panel batteries, shown here on the bottom, to provide flexible energy storage from wind and solar to be tapped at peak times and at night. It's far cheaper for them to establish distributed rather than centralized storage. And for that, the households that receive the batteries can charge a fee for the utilities to use them. The people in these households are shifting from energy consumers to energy prosumers. And currently in Albuquerque, Dr. Karen DeGons is overseeing an energy infrastructure audit in which local neighborhood-based contractors will establish needed baseline energy and broadband data to help us design similar energy strategies here. These energy and broadband strategies will create jobs and reduce poverty, and other resource efficiencies can create more jobs in proven areas such as childcare co-ops, maybe near transit stations, recycling jobs, food security jobs, and others detailed in the Urban Opportunities Report by the Center for Neighborhood Technology. Together, these benefits can be layered onto low-income households to produce cumulative benefits to move many households far enough above the poverty level so as to provide a cushion. Our research with UNM used a social determinants of health lens to reveal that your zip code is your fate. Here, mortality is shown in the international district, and based on where you live, you can have 6 to 8 years different in mortality than citywide numbers. There are measurable benefits to health to better placemaking. And transit strategies also include linkage and connections to other modes, ideally seamlessly. It also reinforces that what matters most is the entire system improving, not just one project. These connections extend more equitable and more affordable access, as well as deliver better health outcomes. Together, these transit strategies can lead to $1 billion in collective savings to households and 25% poverty reduction in as little as 10 years if we align our policies, practices, and public investments. Individual households can't do all of this on their own. Many of these costs are shaped by systemic issues, such as land use and transportation infrastructure controlled by local government. Too much money spent on unsustainable infrastructure, limiting our ability to expand economic opportunity. So investing in sustainability can create jobs and income for low-income people, while at the same time reducing waste, lowering expenses for businesses and families of all incomes, and creating connected communities by improving access for all to basic services, such as groceries, childcare, doctors, and other regular destinations. So what does this look like, and what does it lead to with respect to development strategies? Development strategies will increase reinvestment and create job growth. Those jobs to local people will be undertaking a program, the name is in flux, but Innovate Educate will work with major employers with their top 1 to 2 hard-to-fill positions. They'll recruit neighborhood residents through neighborhood skill-up centers and a job fair, and forward qualified candidates to the employers who've agreed to interview them first. This is one way of linking development to local people and the benefits. Other strategies include physical placemaking improvements to the right-of-way, to create destinations, and to use density to support walkable small business districts. For example, here shown Broadway near Central. Well-designed improvements from a few years ago are close to being ready to be deployed by DMD, but not soon enough to help Hartford Square, a restaurant and catering operation at the corner of MLK. The owner said about her location on Broadway, across from Innovate ABQ, "The street is dangerous even for people getting out of their cars. I have no foot traffic, and my neighbors keep moving, so am I." Where's she moving? To one of our most walkable urban blocks, downtown 4th and Gold. This shows that better places for people make better places for businesses. So let's create more of them. Another example is the 100 block of Harvard, where the bricklight developers and neighborhood association activists that the department heads heard from last month helped create recommended changes on how traffic and parking would work on Harvard. This will further enhance an already great place. And the trick will be for the city to sequence the funding of these public improvements to coincide with the planned private investment in another phase of development in 2 years. Here's a postcard of how historically we've created places for people downtown. An on-street parking lane that buffers pedestrians from traffic, street trees in the public right-of-way, and wide sidewalks. And also you'll notice that the private realm is making a pedestrian amenity with their canopies. All of these things make the walk more pleasant and increase retail sales. So in the photo of today, what about vacancy? We know that density creates demand. In our downtown and in almost every New Mexico downtown, second stories are largely vacant or underutilized. And the once thriving retail below suffers or has disappeared. A large part of their customer base used to live upstairs. But in recent decades, because of a provision in the International Building Code, adopted by most municipalities, requires sprinklers for downtown second-story residential. The cost to rehab new residential in these areas is an extra $40,000 to $70,000. Not all municipalities have kept this provision, and it's one example of the additional regulatory reform that needs to happen here next in Albuquerque. This act alone could induce the market to deliver more than half of the 1,000-unit goal on Central alone, and it's a more permanent way to address retail vacancy. It's a lot easier to put people in a place than to attract them to it. So, density creates demand. As the development community says, retail follows rooftops. Contemporary measurement of retail demand literally counts the number of households within various distances needed to support specific types of retail. A furniture store needs a different number within 2 miles than a coffee shop. A bookstore, different number than a boutique. So retailers, developers, and bankers all use these market numbers. We should too when we're trying to create the conditions for more of what we say we want. And so in Nob Hill, we commissioned a retail study by national expert Robert Gibbs that Councilor Davis frequently cites when he says, increasing density of 500 units within walking distance of the walkable small business district in Nob Hill would create enough new demand to remove our current vacancy levels. Other placemaking techniques to improve retail viability include putting an on-street parking in front of a retail that will increase their sales by $10,000 a year. Use meters to keep an appropriate churn of patrons and prevent hogging parking spaces all day by retail employees. Strategically locate parking facilities that serve whole districts, not a single property. And design and deploy proven, not one-size-fits-all district parking strategies that deliver on urban walkability. This slide shows a table of how the development outcomes were calculated. We considered things like vacant and underutilized land and buildings within walking distance of Central, centered around a 10-minute walk of each of the new art stations. We looked at things like current assessed value, number of residents, number of residential units, and the square footage of potential office and retail space. And we assumed similar growth figures that we've seen in the last 20 years, taking into account Mr. Cog's somewhat recent downward population projection and the demonstrative effect of successful TOD strategies elsewhere. It's not a market study, but it's informed by projections like that. The result was $2 billion in reinvestment in these highly disinvested neighborhoods in downtown and 9,000 jobs. That's 6,000 office and tech and 3,000 retail and restaurant. How quickly? Well, if we assume future development will happen at about the same rate as it has in the last 20 years, it'll take more than 20 years to realize that goal. Even since ART was announced, shown in green, we've not seen the kind of projects developing fast enough to meet our goal. So the speed of our success is directly related to the quality and speed of our interventions. And we need to pick high leverage actions that change entire systems. Things like instituting corridor-wide financing systems and systematically removing regulatory and other barriers. That will enable lots of projects to happen without our direct involvement. We also need to focus on the disinvested, underutilized core that the corridor represents. Of its 12,000 acres, about 25% of it is underutilized. Some is vacant, some is surface parking lots that could be redeveloped, and some is marginal one-story buildings where the land is worth more than the structure. All of it is central opportunity. By comparison, Santolina is 13,000 acres. One example of... Now, at what rate? We're going to need a certain number of small, low-intensity uses, medium, large, and extra large projects every year. The mix may change, but you can see this is a rate that's really going to take all of our institutions and partners to make happen. One example of removing barriers is making it easiest to invest in the central corridor than anywhere else in the region. And this shows Zonar, an innovative software program that we use to digitize the draft IDO. Once a city's zoning code is digitized in Zonar, it can be used for rapid plan review because it crunches all the requirements at once, and it saves the plan reviewer massive amounts of time, reduces errors, and greatly improves the customer experience. It's the fastest single change we could make to systematically increase our speed to permitting. Miami went from reviews that took 2 to 3 weeks of staff time to 2 to 3 days. We used Zonar to visually calculate the maximum yield of each property as part of how we got to our $2 billion. But this tool can also be used with landowners and to assess any potential development site quickly because it crunches all of the site's zoning requirements from all of the tables and all of the dependencies and costs out the setbacks, the parking, and other city requirements. It's a tool that helps the city understand how to maximize the ROI of any property as well. Cities that create value with proven strategies, such as value capture, are generating new development, capitalizing on the new value that they have created. We should follow the lead of places like Las Cruces to do a public sector, not a developer-driven TIF, to further these catalytic public investments and create more value that we can fund. More value than we can fund with the slow and overburdened CIP fund in Albuquerque. Using value capture technique like this, we could likely quadruple what's currently programmed in the CIP. We also need to look at MRA tools such as tax abatement and ensure these policies are aligned and mutually reinforcing. And there's a profound ROI when we invest in central places, as shown by Joe Minicozzi's work here, the land value per acre of centrally located, efficiently laid out urban places in traditional neighborhoods in downtown, which return as much as 30 times the tax benefit per acre than anywhere else in the county. And that analysis to where the city has expenditures in providing services that are greater than the tax value that the property generates, you see another example of how everyone benefits from the central corridor's tax productivity. In fact, many outlying neighborhoods, almost all the surrounding county, are being paid for by the urban core. So where does this all happen? There are both place-based recommendations of places to act and corridor-wide recommendations. Place-based actions involve key physical improvements or higher uses for underperforming public assets, like the parking lot in Old Town, that have been recommended and vetted by the community. 8 key catalytic locations have been identified for the highest ROI, but there are also recommendations for every station area as well. The colors show the different departmental actions needed for each of these projects, and a high level of coordination and interaction is going to be needed. Corridor-wide strategies also need interdepartmental collaboration, and we've been starting that on things like the Universal Youth Pass recommendation. The research has shown that successful city redevelopment and improvement efforts across the country have only one common factor among them, and that's been local alignment. All else seems to be local conditions that flow from alignment. But without it, improvement efforts underperform. And so with teams that we've started in ED, planning, and transit, we've started to align in terms of focusing the work on outcomes defined by city leadership, establishing a practice and a formal rhythm of working together, inviting regular stakeholder feedback, and delivering work in short regular cycles, and identifying the most important work and delivering it first. This is an approach which we can grow to flexibly deal with the complexities of this work and continuously build our capacity to deliver the most value as soon as possible. Implement plans, which Albuquerque has never done with the community plans that it creates. And one place to start is where we have control. Things like Jeff Speck's downtown walkability implementation points from a few years ago. Most cost little more than paint. Several have already been piloted. But let's implement them aggressively to create places for people rather than, as the spec plan notes, defaulting to the, quote, tepid alternative, which waters things down. Some of these things happen and nobody understands why. The spec plan is about making places for people, and it's designed to attract exactly what we want more of, more people in great places. In our 8 catalytic and highest ROI places, we can start, for example, in the International District. There's an MRA property next to Tallinn Market. We can use existing demand for housing that was identified in our market study to build incremental density with neighborhood-based entrepreneurs and small-scale developers, completing the street with a phased set of appropriate missing middle housing projects. I'm going to talk about incremental development more at the end of the presentation. But small-scale projects have a lower barrier to be successful. They don't have to wait for all kinds of capital. And they get something going on one side of the street so that Tallinn on the other side of the street can use that momentum to make its recommended improvements of making a square out of their plaza right now and lining the backside with buildings. If we induce more density over here, both sides of the street, we can help create a center and a destination at the intersection of Louisiana and Central that Tallinn anchors. We can start right away is issuing the drafted RFP for the Uptown Transit Center. And we should line up tax credits and other public sources that we know are going to be needed prior, and don't put that on to the developer and lengthen their timeline. We advertised the RFP to the developers who participated in our Smart Growth America National webinar and our local folks. And since it's among the most valuable land that the city owns, we should be considering value capture mechanisms like TIF here too to continue to fund the public investments with the new growth that the investments generate. Talked about Old Town, we take on the parking lot as we described, and we focus on the public realm right now, the right-of-way and the public spaces that need to be designed and built. Lead to private lots and blocks that need to be priced and marketed, and development guidelines so that we can get exactly the kind of compatible, reinforcing development that we want to see that's appropriate to Old Town and that people want to visit. Finally, I want to talk about the rail yards. It's a mayor priority. A market study that we did for Innovate ABQ site, which was close enough to be relevant to the rail yard site, showed a very low demand for most uses, but a good demand for residential. So right now, that's a great place to start. So let's look at the neighborhood adjacent to the rail yards, Borellis, and talk a little bit about the incremental development that I mentioned. Borellis, like all of our traditional neighborhoods, was built on a street grid with narrow lots and a variety of housing types that you see examples of below. Today, many of these lots are what we call missing teeth, vacant properties in neighborhoods, not just Borellis, but Reynolds, West Downtown, West Old Town, DNA, Edo, etc. And in traditional neighborhoods across America, especially in low-demand cities, infill lots sit vacant because the construction industry has specialized in producing just two kinds of housing from among the variety we see below. On either end of the spectrum, They produce single-family homes that are most cost-effective to produce in subdivisions because of the economies of scale rather than infill sites. And at the other end of the spectrum, complicated buildings that often have more layers of financing than they have stories, such as the Imperial Building downtown with the Silver Street Market, a great building with 4 stories and 7 layers of financing. So this is the missing middle, everything in between single-family home and multi-story, of the kinds of houses reflected in all of our traditional neighborhoods: duplexes, tris, quads, townhomes, courtyards, apartments. They're rarely produced today. Though there are plenty of examples of these buildings in every traditional neighborhood in Albuquerque, in many places they're illegal to build today because of zoning. Since the 50s and 60s, laws were changed to essentially exclude renters. We too have exclusionary zoning, and with it we have an erosion in income diversity and other diversity in our neighborhoods. But even more recently, council shot down casitas, a uniquely Albuquerque form of missing middle housing that exists and is celebrated in many neighborhoods. These are more regulations we can change. And we did change some of that with the IDEO work that we collaborated on. Additionally, we've now trained a cohort of almost 24 neighborhood-based, small-scale entrepreneurs who can build this missing middle with locally sourced labor, and they're learning how to attract local commercial tenants from neighborhood-based social and personal networks. They are metaphorically farmers learning to cultivate and grow their own neighborhood's places. What might it look like if we applied this kind of development to Borellis? Well, 3 of our incremental developers already own property and some live in Borellis. We could train even more. What if the local entrepreneurs that were looking at properties along First Street, immediately adjacent to the residential zone on the rail yards property, say from Santa Fe to Atlantic and the fire station, and they worked with property owners in starting rebuilding the south block of First. And the MRA sold off, say, 100 feet of its property on the north block in small lots to small-scale developers from this cohort and the neighborhood. And we train more people if we need to. Local tenants, such as a millennial barber, who people come to see from around the city, who might live in one of the units and run his business out of another, and eventually rent to own, stabilizing the neighborhood. Maybe there's a Borellis Coffee House branded food truck serving after hours, and a Borellis generated tap room. We could get both sides of the street in a 1 to 2 block area, the same size as Bricklight, using existing demand, local tenants, wealth building strategies, and commercial, not public financing. Just add some string lights and we've supported a locally grown, eminently doable transformation, whatever else happens on the rail yards. This becomes a short-term breakthrough success that might change how the longer-term game is played on the 26 acres, based on what we see and learn and what innovation comes from local folks. So, these are highlights of the principles that built Berkey and how the TOD recommendations generated from applying those principles today create spaces that strengthen walkable places for people. They've been vetted by over 1,000 residents and business people in our central neighborhoods over the past 2 years. It's now time to implement. Thank you.